welcome to Toronto Talks, the podcast that brings you the most important stories about money, business, and technology.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just looking to stay ahead of the curve, we dive deep into the latest in finance, innovation, and industry.
Hosted by Ashraf Amin and Sophie the Sage.
We blend human expertise with cutting-edge technology to explore the dynamic world of modern industry
with fearless curiosity and wit.
Let's get started.
For most of modern business history, the challenge facing organizations was information scarcity. Leaders operated with incomplete data, delayed signals, and fragmented visibility. Strategy often meant making the best decisions possible with the least amount of information available. But over the last decade, that equation has flipped. Today, organizations are not short on information. They are flooded with it. Dashboards, metrics, predictive models, AI copilots, entire analytic teams producing insights in real time. In theory, we should be entering the most informed era of decision-making in the history of business.
And yet, something doesn't add up. Despite unprecedented access to technology, data, and analytical capability, the majority of large-scale transformations are still failing. McKinsey estimates that roughly 70% of digital transformations fail to meet their objectives. That's not a marginal improvement problem. That's a systemic one. And the paradox deepens when we look at artificial intelligence. Nearly every major company on the planet is investing aggressively in AI. According to recent industry research, more than 90% of organizations are increasing their AI investment. But when asked whether they have actually achieved organizational maturity with these technologies, only about 1% say yes. So the question becomes unavoidable.
If we have more intelligence, more computation, and more insight than ever before, why does execution remain so fragile? Because intelligence and judgment are not the same things.
Technology has become extraordinarily good at generating answers. Algorithms can analyze massive datasets, detect patterns that humans would miss, and produce recommendations in seconds. Large language models can synthesize information across disciplines and generate plausible explanations in seconds. But organizations don't operate inside clean datasets or controlled experiments. They operate inside complex human systems. In those environments, the problem is rarely a lack of information. The problem is interpretation. Which indicators matter, which metrics are misleading, which patterns represent genuine opportunity and which are just noise.
Those are judgment calls, and judgment doesn't scale in the same way that technology does. You can deploy a new analytics platform across an entire company in a matter of months, but developing leaders who can interpret those insights responsibly, understand their limitations, and make decisions under uncertainty, that takes years.
So what we are witnessing is a kind of asymmetry. Technology is scaling intelligence rapidly. Human organizations are learning to apply that intelligence much more slowly, which explains why so many transformation efforts start with enormous optimism and end in quiet disappointment. Because the typical transformation plan focuses on tools, new systems, new platforms, new frameworks. And those things matter. They can absolutely expand capability, but they don't automatically improve judgment. In fact, in some cases, they can make the problem harder. When leaders suddenly have access to hundreds of new metrics, predictive dashboards, and AI-generated recommendations, the decision environment becomes more complex, not less. More information doesn't necessarily create more clarity. Sometimes it just creates more variables. And when organizations try to solve that complexity, they often reach for yet another framework.
Which is understandable. Frameworks create structure. They offer the promise that complexity can be managed through process. that the right operating model or transformation playbook will make the system work better.
And to some degree, frameworks can help. Agile methodologies, digital operating models, transformation playbooks, these have spread rapidly across industries. In fact, surveys suggest that well over 2/3 of organizations now report using some form of Agile framework. But despite the widespread adoption of these approaches, the underlying success rates of large transformations remain stubbornly low, which suggests something important. The constraint may not be the absence of frameworks. The constraint may be the human operating system required to use those frameworks well, because frameworks can define process, but they cannot substitute for judgment.
And that distinction becomes even more important as artificial intelligence begins to enter the system. Because AI doesn't just increase the amount of information organizations can process, it increases the speed at which decisions must be made. Recommendations appear instantly, predictions update in real time. Entire categories of analysis that once took weeks can now be produced in seconds.
Intelligence is becoming abundant, which raises a deeper question. If answers can be generated instantly, what role remains for wisdom? Because the scarce resource is no longer knowledge, it's judgment. That is the central leadership challenge of the machine age. Technology is rapidly expanding what organizations are capable of knowing, but knowing more does not automatically translate into understanding more. And understanding more does not automatically produce better decisions, which means the real bottleneck may not be computational power or analytical capability. It may be the human capacity to interpret, prioritize, and act with discernment, which points to a stark realization. Technology is scaling intelligence faster than organizations are learning to use it wisely.
And that raises an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the biggest challenge facing modern organizations isn't adopting the next wave of technology. Maybe it's developing the kind of leadership required to use that technology wisely.
And to explore that idea, we need to look at why so many transformation frameworks, despite their popularity, continue to struggle when they meet the realities of real organizations. That's where we'll begin next, with the frameworks organizations hoped would solve this problem.
If the real constraint inside modern organizations is judgment, not information, then the obvious question becomes, why haven't all the frameworks we've developed over the past 2 decades solved that problem? Because modern companies are not short on frameworks. Agile methodologies, digital transformation playbooks, operating models designed for speed and adaptability. Across industries, organizations have invested enormous energy trying to redesign how work gets done. In fact, surveys suggest that well over 2/3 of organizations now report using some form of agile framework. And yet, despite the widespread adoption of these approaches, the overall success rate of major transformation efforts hasn't improved very much. So, something interesting is happening. Organizations are getting better at implementing frameworks, but they are not necessarily getting better at transforming themselves.
Which suggests that frameworks may not fail for the reasons we usually assume. When transformations stall, leaders often blame execution problems, poor rollout, insufficient training, resistance from teams. But the deeper issue may be more fundamental. Frameworks can change process. They can reorganize workflows, introduce new cadences, or create new decision structures. But frameworks cannot automatically change how leaders judge. And that distinction matters more than most organizations realize, because the effectiveness of any framework ultimately depends on the judgment of the people applying it. If leaders interpret signals poorly, prioritize the wrong problems, or default to familiar patterns under pressure, even the most sophisticated methodology will eventually revert to the same old behavior. In other words, the framework may change, but the system running the framework may not.
Alright, Sophie, let me start with something simple. If you walk into almost any large organization today, you'll hear the same language repeated over and over. Agile transformation, digital operating models, product-led organizations, frameworks designed to make companies faster, more adaptive, more innovative. And yet, the success rate of large transformation efforts hasn't improved very much. So what's actually happening there? Why aren't these frameworks solving the problem?
Part of the issue is that frameworks are designed to change process, not judgment. They reorganize how work flows through the system. For example, Agile introduces things like iterative development cycles, cross-functional teams, and rapid feedback loops. Those changes can absolutely improve coordination and responsiveness inside complex organizations. But frameworks like Agile also assume something about the leadership environment in which they operate. They assume leaders are comfortable with experimentation. They assume authority can be distributed across teams. They assume decisions can evolve as new information emerges. When those assumptions hold, frameworks can dramatically increase adaptability. But many organizations attempt to adopt those frameworks while still operating with traditional leadership structures, where authority remains centralized, where experimentation is treated as risk, and where leaders are expected to deliver predictable outcomes. So the framework enters the organization, but the decision logic of the organization remains largely unchanged.
Got it. So the company installs the framework, but keeps running the same operating system underneath it. That sounds less like transformation and more like translation. How does that usually show up inside the organization?
Often it appears as ritual. Teams begin performing the mechanics of the framework. They hold daily stand-ups, they organize work into sprints, they adopt the vocabulary of Agile, but the deeper structure of decision-making remains largely intact. Strategic choices still move through rigid hierarchies, incentives still reward risk avoidance rather than experimentation, leaders still revert to familiar decision patterns when pressure increases. Over time, the organization becomes fluent in the language of transformation, but the behavioral patterns that actually shape outcomes evolve much more slowly, which helps explain an interesting statistic. Surveys suggest that roughly 70% of organizations now report using some form of Agile methodology. Yet despite that widespread adoption, the overall success rate of major transformation efforts remains stubbornly low. Put differently, many organizations have adopted the framework, but far fewer have changed the system that runs it.
Wow. Okay, so if the framework itself isn't the limiting factor, then the obvious question becomes, what is? What actually determines whether these transformations succeed?
Research into transformation success tends to point to a different set of variables. Studies from organizations like McKinsey consistently find that successful transformations correlate strongly with leadership alignment across the executive team. They also correlate with investment in capability building, meaning organizations actively develop the skills required to operate in the new environment. And they correlate with clear communication about why the transformation is happening in the first place. Those factors all share something important. They're not technical variables, they're human ones. Frameworks provide structure, but the way that structure behaves still depends on the leaders using it. If leadership alignment is weak, if incentives remain misaligned, or if people do not understand the purpose of the change, the framework itself cannot compensate for those gaps.
Understood. So, in a sense, the framework provides the architecture, but leadership determines how the building is actually used. Which makes me wonder about something. Why is it so difficult for organizations to change those deeper leadership patterns?
Because organizations are not blank systems, they are complex ecosystems shaped by culture, incentives, history, and internal power structures. When a new framework arrives, it doesn't enter an empty environment. It enters that entire ecosystem, and ecosystems tend to preserve their existing equilibrium. If the deeper incentives inside the organization remain unchanged, the system will often adapt the framework rather than allowing the framework to transform the system. So instead of changing how the organization operates, the framework gradually becomes absorbed into existing routines. Teams perform the new rituals, but the old decision patterns remain intact, which is why transformation programs can look very elegant in diagrams, but feel very different when they encounter the lived reality of an organization.
Right. And that probably explains a moment a lot of leaders recognize. The transformation looks perfect on paper, but the organization still feels stuck. So when leaders reach that point, what are they usually missing?
Often they're discovering that transformation is not primarily a technical challenge. It's a leadership challenge. Implementing a framework is relatively straightforward. Changing how leaders interpret complexity is much harder. It requires people to become comfortable making decisions under uncertainty. It requires leaders to distribute authority more effectively. And it requires organizations to rethink incentives that may have rewarded stability in the past but now discourage experimentation. Those shifts involve judgment, and judgment tends to develop through experience navigating complex systems, which is why transformation often looks deceptively simple in theory, but much more complicated in practice.
This discussion raises a deeper question. If organizations already have access to powerful frameworks, methodologies, and transformation playbooks, why do so many of those efforts still struggle when they collide with the realities of real organizations? Because at some point in time, the conversation stops being about tools. It becomes a question of leadership, of mindset, of how people interpret complexity and make decisions inside systems that are constantly evolving.
And that's exactly the terrain our next guest has spent much of her career navigating. Barbara Whitman has worked at the intersection of technology transformation and organizational leadership for decades. Her experience spans global companies attempting to modernize their systems, their processes, and most importantly, the way leaders think about change itself. What she's observed is something many organizations struggle to articulate. Transformation rarely fails because the framework is wrong. More often, it fails because the people running the framework have not evolved with it.
This episode of Toronto Talks is brought to you by Conquest Distributors, your trusted source for shipping, packaging, and warehouse supplies. For nearly 20 years, they've helped Canadian businesses thrive with fast, reliable service and a commitment to integrity and efficiency. Getting the products you need when you need them has never been easier. Now, let's talk about something real. With the latest round of tariffs coming from south of the border, supporting Canadian manufacturers and supply vendors isn't just good for business, it's good for Canada. So why keep funneling money to US giants like Uline when you can get the same or better quality products right here at home? When you choose Conquest Distributors, you're not just getting top-tier packaging, shipping, and warehouse essentials at competitive prices. You're investing in local businesses, strengthening Canadian supply chains, and keeping economic power here at home where it belongs. With fast, reliable fulfillment, an easy-to-use online store, and a team that genuinely cares about your success, Conquest Distributors proves that Canadian businesses can compete and win on quality and service. And now, to make it even easier, Toronto Talks listeners get to enjoy 15% off their first online order with promo code TALK15. Head on over to conquestdistributors.ca and see for yourself. That's conquestdistributors.ca, your trusted business supply partners. Now, back to the show.
Determines whether those efforts succeed or stall.
Barbara, it's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you. That was an amazing intro.
Oh, I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
Barbara, before we dive in, I would love for you to share a little bit about your journey, who you are, and how you came to the work that you're doing now.
Right. So maybe to start out, I would call myself an accidental technologist. So I kind of fell into IT, more of a bad turn of fate. That's how it felt when it happened.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Germany, so I'm not from the US originally, as you may be able to hear a little bit. And my huge passion when I was growing up was bicycles. So I was working in the bike industry, so in sporting goods up and down in all different functions, and I was racing mountain bikes.
Wow.
And then my immediate surroundings, they kept poking, and they're like, "You ought to get a real job. This ain't working. It's like
Right.
this is not what a woman does." And I was like, "Okay, then let's get something different." And I figured IT would be something that is decent. So that's how I slipped into working for SAP, and they trained me up to be a consultant, and the rest is history. Worked for SAP for about 5 years and made it up to the top innovation team. Have a couple of patents that have my name on it. And then I was like, well, I think I want to work on a different scale of things, and I want to be more immediate with what I do. And I started my own consultancy.
Excellent.
Because what I looked at is when large projects were completed, there was still a lot of things to be done. But large consultancies were nowhere to be found. They were like, oh, off to the next. So
Understood, yeah.
So I got more intrigued by how do humans and technology actually interact, how do organizations really adopt to changes, and I was turning more and more into that space, and that led me to where I am today, where I really say, well, technology is the DNA of every company. We cannot deny that anymore, but now we need to see how we upgrade the humans and the organizational reality around it.
Fantastic. Well, you know what? Let's just dive in, because I think that's a great intro to set things up for our conversation today. So the first question that I have for you, Barbara, is when you think about wisdom in the context of modern organizations, what do you feel is most often misunderstood or overlooked?
I think misunderstood and overlooked are two things. One is that we are constantly talking about transformation, but we are not understanding it properly. I always compare it with, the caterpillar that really needs to turn into a butterfly, but instead we are taking the same caterpillar we have, and instead of legs, we give it wheels. So there is a fundamental misunderstanding, and in combination with that, we do think that technology will fix everything.
Right.
And essentially, it really is a combination of many things. So I look at it as like almost an ecosystem that needs to be just tuned right. You're tweaking on one end, you got to upgrade the other. So what we have neglected really is the human aspect of things, and I think AI is really bringing it to the forefront, because we get new AI models every night, pretty much.
Yeah.
So how do we upgrade how we are behaving as humans, and then how does all of this intermix? How does technology and humans really interact together? And what are the things that help us orienting ourselves in this world that is immensely complex? So at the intersection of all of this, that's where wisdom comes in.
Got it. That's a great framing. I love how you talk about how we have to learn how to upgrade the human interacting within the technology, and specifically the extent to which AI is really bearing on that forefront The next question I have for you here, Barbara, is I know you've spoken about moving beyond frameworks towards something more lived and embodied. Mm-hmm. Where have you seen models fall short in practice, and what tends to matter more in those moments?
So I think the next best thing that we always gravitate to, if it's not technology, it's a method, and that's a framework. So it's like, oh yay, now we have this new technology, but now we also got to have agile or something. What we tend to forget is that with a pure framework, you cannot really fix how we are acting and thinking and making decisions. You can to a certain extent, but you still have the limitation of the human.
Right.
So in a sense, every framework needs a new mindset. Mm-hmm. So that goes back to upgrading the people. So if you give somebody that is secretly thinking, well, we've tried that before. If you give them a new framework, it's not going to do much. So how are you bringing the people along and really matching the mindset and their thinking about transformation and growth to technology and a method? That's why I think, any method or framework is basically a waste if it is not embedded properly.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, especially when you refer to people needing to change their mindsets or upgrade their mindsets so that the framework makes sense and provides optimal results, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Okay. The next question I have for you here is, how do you personally navigate the tension between clarity on one side and uncertainty on the other when working with leaders operating inside complex technological systems?
Oh, that's a loaded question, and I'm getting tangled up in it too. So what works for me is, cleaning up my own litter box, if you will, constantly. So I constantly need to work on, how I walk into rooms, how non-biased I am potentially, and this is inner work. This is my personal mindset that I need to work on and that I need to constantly upgrade and clean up. Because, if I walk into a room, and that happens to every other leader, and your buttons are being pushed, and everyone knows about that. You're presenting somewhere and you're looking at somebody in the room and you're thinking, I bet they think I'm not nailing it. I bet they think I'm stupid or something,
Right.
It really takes away. That's total noise. So in a complex world, with my personal noise on top of it, that's what makes it super complicated. That's what limits me in making great decisions and also taking in other people's opinion and really hear them. So that is the first and foremost thing that I need to do. So, keeping myself basically aligned and neutral as much as I can. And then it's, just times where I totally slow down and I go on walks or hikes and really to recharge and step away from that constant noise and clutter that happens.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's a very human experience to carry that constant narrative and that noise, and it can most certainly negatively impact your clarity and your capacity to operate at an optimal level. So yeah, I completely understand. And I like how you frame the solution being around taking a breath and, taking a walk and being able to step away from that noise. So.
And at the end of the day, we always need to keep in perspective the only thing that we have control over and that we can change is ourselves. And if we do that, we create ripples. And that's within organizations, in the world, you name it. But this is what we have control over.
Makes perfect sense to me, Barbara. let me move on to the next question here. In your experience, what do you think it takes for organizations to develop genuine discernment rather than just better tools?
So one thing is that organizations need to let go of assumptions that were never talked about. And that means that, the C-level and what I call the execution layer, the middle management, they need to come to a table and really talk about, hey, what are we planning in terms of a strategy? How does that all fit in with reality? Best example would be AI, C-level is like, we got to have it. Everyone else in the industry has it. So it's the total fear of missing out.
Right.
But then reality hits and it's like, well, maybe we start automating first or something. So there's a lot of assumptions in the room that are never talked about. And creating a space where these things can be talked about without finger pointing, that is a huge piece. So what is missing a lot in organizations is what I call a safe space where, the right conditions were settled before a meeting starts. So that is the biggest piece for discernment.
Right.
The other piece is that we need to learn to listen again.
Okay.
And that takes us to slow down a little bit. Because what I see in organizations is that we constantly jump to solutions prematurely for the most part, because we are, the train is running and we are building the tracks as we are going.
Yeah.
And then we don't take the time to really understand what the problem is that we are actually trying to solve.
I love how you talk about dismantling assumptions and taking the time to slow down and creating a safe space, like you said, for people to be able to do that work within organizations, because otherwise it's suboptimal at best and crippling at worst.
And the last piece I would like to throw in is that people need a map. And in essence, every company is driving with a navigation system, and that gives us not a visual coup of where we are. It's like, so I grew up in a time where we still had paper maps when we went on a road trip. And, you could put it on the hood of the car and say, ooh, we're here and this is where we're going. That's what's missing, without orientation. You cannot go anywhere. So, and that also leads into assumptions. The assumption is that everyone understands that we are, shooting for this, and it may be very different.
So having that consensus after dismantling those assumptions and making sure everyone's on board is key and critical. And like you said, having direction, purpose, a map to guide you is also key.
Right, and keep pulling out the map at every meeting you have. Keep repeating it, It's like, okay, this is what we agreed on. We are here now. This is the next step we are taking. We learn through repetition. We change behavior through repetition. We keep forgetting that. And because we don't do that, as we feel this may be stupid, right? Another assumption.
Yep.
We are assuming that everyone knows if it's shown once. That's how we are kind of veering off into a very different direction.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The point that you made about repetition and driving the same message and themes over and over again is critical, because, like you said, you can assume that once you've shared something once, that becomes canonical and people just understand that that's, how we're going to be proceeding, but drifting from that seems to be par for the course. So, I think that's a really key point, Barbara. All right, so let's wrap this up here. I've got one last question for you before we finish up. Just in terms of advice for young people in the audience who are perhaps joining the workforce now or in the middle of finishing up their studies and are going to be exploring how to navigate this new job landscape, what advice would you provide for them when it comes to wisdom and discernment and the things that we talked about?
I think it's key to listen to different generational voices. What you guys bring to the table is amazing, and I love how things are questioned and taken apart. And I think it's super important to just kind of get different perspectives and, just take in what others have to say. That's what makes the magic.
Fantastic. Those are some really good words of wisdom. Barbara, thank you again for joining us today. What I really appreciate about our conversation is that it resisted tidy conclusions and stayed within the tension between clarity and uncertainty, capability and wisdom, intelligence and meaning. Rather than offering a new operating manual, you've pointed to something quieter and more demanding. The work of discernment, presence, and responsibility inside systems that don't slow down for reflection. Thank you again for bringing such depth, honesty, and lived experience into the discussion. It's been a real pleasure exploring these questions with you, Barbara.
Thank you.
One of the things that stands out in Barbara's perspective is how consistently the conversation returns to leadership. Not frameworks, not technology, not even strategy in the abstract, but the mindset leaders bring into adaptive systems. As she described, organizations often try to upgrade their tools without upgrading the way people inside the system think and make decisions. Technology changes quickly, but the human system around it, assumptions, incentives, habits of decision-making, evolves much more slowly. And that gap is where many transformation efforts struggle, because modern organizations aren't just dealing with new technologies, they're dealing with a level of complexity many leaders have never had to navigate before. In earlier eras, the challenge was often access to information. Today, the challenge is filtering it. Leaders are surrounded by dashboards, alerts, recommendations, and competing inputs. And the ability to interpret those inputs responsibly may be becoming one of the most important capabilities modern leadership requires. That leads to a harder problem. What happens when leaders themselves are operating inside environments saturated with information, interruptions, and competing priorities? That's where the conversation becomes even more interesting.
Here are the top 6 reasons why smart Toronto businesses choose Conquest over Uline. We were going to do a top 5 list, but truth is, doing a little extra is kind of our thing. Number 6, we offer free shipping. Uline doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really get any simpler than that, does it? Number 5, we've got 35 5-star Google reviews from real customers.
Sorry. It's 62 now.
This is why you don't patch ads. You just shoot a new one.
Yeah, but then you miss the part where the number keeps going up.
Accuracy matters, especially when it's public.
We're interrupting success. To be precise?
Fix it while it's working.
That's literally a Toronto Talks episode.
Everything here is.
This city's full of people who notice details and pay for them.
Okay, well, that is our customer.
Exactly.
They've got Yelp, Trustpilot, and Glassdoor reviews that read like corporate horror fiction. Number 4, we're actually in the GTA. Uline, they're out in Milton, aka delivery purgatory. We ship like your time matters, because it does. Number 3, we are proudly all Canadian. Our customers, suppliers, even our platform, Uline, they're one of America's biggest employers, stars and stripes to the core. Number 2, our carbon footprint is essentially non-existent. Remote operations, no warehouses, and definitely no junk mail catalogs from the Jurassic period. And reason number 1, Uline infamously offer their free hats and barbecue sauce. We, on the other hand, offer real savings, fast service, and actual value. If Barbara's experience tells us anything, it's that transformation isn't just a technological challenge. It's a cognitive one. Because the environments leaders operate in today are fundamentally different from the ones most organizations were designed for. Modern companies generate enormous volumes of information, and Microsoft research suggests knowledge workers are interrupted roughly every 2 minutes during the workday. Dashboards update in real time. Performance metrics arrive instantly. AI systems generate predictions and recommendations continuously.
At the same time, the number of communication channels inside organizations has exploded. Email, Slack, messaging platforms, video calls, meetings layered on top of meetings. In many cases, leaders are expected to interpret dozens, sometimes hundreds of inputs every day, while simultaneously making strategic decisions that affect entire organizations. Which means attention is constantly being pulled in new directions. Leaders often spend more than a third of their time in meetings, which means much of the day is spent reacting, responding to messages, reviewing metrics, joining calls, processing updates. And yet leadership still requires something much deeper than reaction. It requires the ability to step back, interpret patterns, and make decisions that shape the direction of their organizations. But that kind of thinking requires something increasingly scarce: attention, which points to an uncomfortable possibility. Modern organizations may be surrounding their leaders with more information than ever before, while simultaneously making it harder for them to think clearly about what actually matters.
So if the environment leaders are operating in today is fundamentally different from the one most organizations were designed for, I want to start with something simple. Most executives would say that now they have more information available to them than at any point in time in the past. Real-time dashboards, continuous analytics, AI systems generating predictions. In theory, that should make decision-making easier. But many leaders say the opposite is happening, that decisions actually feel harder to make. Why does more intelligence sometimes actually produce more confusion?
Because when information expands faster than attention, complexity increases. Historically, leaders operated in environments where information was relatively scarce. Reports arrived periodically, analysis moved slowly, and decision makers had time to interpret what they were seeing. Modern organizations operate very differently. Information arrives continuously, metrics update in real time, messages and alerts appear throughout the day. Instead of interpreting a small set of indicators, leaders must interpret dozens or even hundreds of data points simultaneously. That doesn't just increase the quantity of information, it changes the cognitive task entirely. Decision-making becomes less about gathering intelligence and more about filtering it, determining which indicators actually deserve attention and which are simply noise.
Got it. So the real constraint isn't access to information anymore, it's the ability to sort through it. And the environment leaders work in probably makes that even harder. What does constant interruption actually do to the way people think and make decisions?
Interruption fragments attention. Research on knowledge work suggests people are interrupted roughly every 2 minutes during the average workday. Each interruption forces the brain to switch contexts. Individually, those shifts seem minor, responding to a message, reviewing a metric, joining a call. But cognitively, every context switch has a cost. The brain must reorient itself to the new task, then attempt to return to the previous one. When this happens repeatedly throughout the day, sustained concentration becomes extremely difficult. And sustained concentration is exactly what complex decision-making requires. Without that attention, leaders are far more likely to rely on shortcuts, quick judgments, familiar patterns, or whatever signal appears most urgent in the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it means the environment leaders are operating in is almost designed for reaction rather than reflection. And leadership involves an enormous amount of coordination. How much of that cognitive load is coming from the way leadership schedules are structured?
A significant portion. Studies of executive time allocation show that leaders often spend more than a third of their time in meetings. In many organizations, it is considerably more than that. Meetings themselves are not inherently problematic. Complex organizations require coordination. But when schedules become saturated with meetings, messages, and updates, something essential begins to disappear. Time to think. Time to step back from immediate demands and examine patterns. Leadership decisions often require interpreting information across multiple parts of an organization: markets, technology, operations, people. That kind of synthesis requires cognitive space. When leaders operate in environments where attention is constantly fragmented, it becomes much harder to step back and see the larger system.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us back to something Barbara talked about in the interview. She described leaders needing to manage their own internal noise. So, if it's not just environment generating noise, leaders themselves are navigating biases, pressures, expectations. How does that internal layer interact with everything we've been talking about?
Internal noise compounds external noise. Leaders are not simply interpreting neutral data. They are interpreting data within environments shaped by incentives, expectations, reputational risk, and uncertainty. Every decision carries consequences. Some affect careers, some affect organizational outcomes, some affect how others perceive leadership competence. Those pressures influence how outputs are interpreted. Two leaders can look at the same information and reach very different conclusions because they bring different assumptions, experiences, and incentives to the decision. When those internal dynamics combine with environments saturated with information and interruption, the cognitive demands increase dramatically. Leadership becomes less about gathering information and more about maintaining clarity inside complexity.
Right, so wisdom in that environment isn't really about knowledge anymore. It's about deciding what actually deserves attention.
When information is scarce, intelligence becomes the limiting factor. When information becomes abundant, the limiting factor becomes discernment. Leaders must decide which signals matter, which patterns indicate meaningful change, which metrics represent real progress rather than temporary noise. Those judgments shape how organizations allocate resources, respond to risk, and pursue opportunity. The result is that the quality of leadership decisions increasingly depends on the ability to filter complexity rather than simply absorb it.
That's really interesting because it actually creates a bit of a paradox. Organizations are investing enormous resources to generate more intelligence, more analytics, more dashboards, more predictions. But the real advantage may belong to the leaders who can slow down enough to interpret that intelligence clearly.
But attention remains limited, and the leaders who can protect that attention, who can step back from the noise and identify what truly matters, are the ones most likely to lead effectively.
So we find ourselves back at the idea we started this episode with. Technology is expanding what organizations are capable of knowing, but knowing more does not automatically produce better decisions. In fact, if leaders are overwhelmed by metrics, alerts, and recommendations, the opposite can happen. Decision-making can become more reactive, more fragmented, more driven by whatever demand happens to be most urgent in the moment.
And that's why the concept of wisdom becomes so important in the machine age. Intelligence is becoming increasingly abundant, Organizations can generate insights, predictions, and analyses faster than ever before. But the ability to interpret those insights, to prioritize them, question them, and act on them responsibly remains a deeply human capability, which suggests that the real competitive advantage in the years ahead may not come from access to intelligence. It may come from the leaders who are capable of steering it wisely.
When organizations talk about transformation, the conversation usually focuses on technology. New systems, new platforms, new tools, designed to process information faster and generate better insights. And in many ways, those investments are working. The capabilities available to modern organizations are extraordinary compared to even a decade ago. Artificial intelligence can analyze massive datasets, detect patterns, and generate recommendations almost instantly. Entire categories of analysis that once took teams of analysts weeks to complete can now be produced in minutes. So, by any technical measure, organizations are becoming far more intelligent. And yet, the results have been uneven. Many companies still struggle to translate those capabilities into real transformation.
According to recent research from PwC, more than half of CEOs say they have yet to see significant financial returns from their AI investments, which suggests something important. The challenge may not be technological, it may be organizational, because intelligence alone does not determine outcomes. What matters is how that intelligence is interpreted and applied. Organizations can generate thousands of insights and predictions, but those outputs still need to be prioritized, interpreted in context, and translated into decisions that shape how the organization behaves. And that process still depends heavily on human judgment. Leaders decide which signals matter, which risks to accept, which opportunities to pursue. And those decisions rarely happen in environments of perfect clarity. They happen inside real organizations, where information is incomplete, incentives are misaligned, and the consequences of action are often uncertain, which means the role of leadership is not disappearing as technology advances. If anything, it may be becoming more demanding.
And that may be the real shift happening underneath all the headlines about artificial intelligence. For most of modern history, organizations struggled to access enough information. Today, the challenge is almost the opposite. Intelligence is expanding rapidly, but the ability to apply it thoughtfully remains uneven.
Which leads to a simple but powerful conclusion. As intelligence becomes abundant, wisdom becomes the new bottleneck. The organizations that succeed in the coming decade may not be the ones with the most advanced algorithms. They may be the ones whose leaders are best able to navigate complexity, to filter noise, question assumptions, and guide systems that are becoming increasingly difficult to understand. In other words, the future may not belong to the organizations that generate the most intelligence. It may belong to the ones that cultivate the most discernment.
And that raises an even deeper question. If intelligence is expanding rapidly, but wisdom remains scarce, what happens to decision-making inside modern institutions?
Because in many organizations today, the challenge isn't a lack of information anymore. It's translating that information into decisive action.
And that points to something deeper. Why do institutions sometimes make worse decisions even if the quality of the data improves?
That's the paradox we'll explore next time.
That's it for the show. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and reach out to us anytime at talk@torontotalks.ca. We'll see you next time right here on Toronto Talks, where big ideas come to life
and curiosity never sleeps.